It's strange how one decision, a single impulsive yes, can set your entire world spinning off its axis. That's what happened to me 3 months ago, on a night that feels more like a fever dream than a memory. Even now, I can't decide if it was the worst mistake of my life or the moment I finally came alive. It started with an argument. Daniel, my boyfriend of 2 years, had perfected the art of making me feel small without raising his voice. His passive aggression was like a slow-acting poison, and by the time I stormed out of his apartment, I was furious. At him, at myself, at the stale monotony of everything we'd become. Back in my own place, I stared at the invitation on my phone. It had been sitting in my inbox for weeks, a secret I wasn't sure I'd ever admit to receiving. The message was tantalizingly simple. This Saturday, a night to let go, to feel alive. Come as you are, or as someone you've always wanted to be. I had scoffed when I first read it, thinking it was spam or some kind of joke. But now, with Daniel's words still echoing in my head, it felt like an escape hatch. A reckless idea formed in the back of my mind. What if I went? Not to punish him, but to remind myself of who I used to be before I got lost in our routine of half-hearted apologies and recycled promises. I didn't give myself time to reconsider. I threw on a dress, a wine-red slip that barely skimmed my thighs and shimmered like liquid under the dim lights of my bedroom. It was the kind of dress you buy on a whim, telling yourself you'll wear it someday. Someday turned out to be that night. A dash of perfume, bold lipstick, and heels high enough to feel dangerous. I barely recognized the woman in the mirror, but that was the point. The house was tucked away in a part of the city I rarely ventured into, quiet and unassuming. As I walked up the path, my pulse quickened with each step. The door opened before I could knock, and I was greeted by a man with a grin that made my stomach flip. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "First time." I nodded, my lips parting to answer, but he had already stepped aside, ushering me into a world that smelled like wine and whispered secrets. The interior was nothing like I expected. No cheap thrills or over-the-top decadence. Instead, it was warm, intimate, a haze of golden light and low, sultry music. People lounged on plush couches, their laughter soft but conspiratorial, like they all shared a joke I wasn't in on yet. The air hummed with possibility, a charged current I could feel beneath my skin. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the fizzing liquid as light as my head felt. I wandered through the space, every step pulling me deeper into a story I hadn't decided how I wanted to end. Faces turned as I passed, some appraising, others inviting. I met their eyes briefly, giving nothing away. For the first time in forever I felt dangerous. And then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the room, tall and lean, with a confidence that wasn't practiced. It was ingrained. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt his pull anyway. When our eyes finally met, it was like a collision, a spark in the air between us. He smiled, not a wide grin but something subtle, as though he already knew what would happen next. I didn't wait for him to approach. The woman I was tonight didn't hesitate. I walked up to him, my heels clicking against the polished floor, my heart hammering in time with the music. "You're new here," he said, his voice low and rough, like a secret meant only for me. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, tipping my head back to meet his gaze. "Not obvious," he said, leaning in just enough for me to catch a hint of his cologne. "You just have a different energy. Like you're on the edge of something." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Maybe I am." He smiled then, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a thrill straight through me. "Let's see if I can help you jump." For the rest of the night, I lost myself in the swirl of the party. The laughter, the lingering touches, the way everyone moved together like pieces of a puzzle that fit too perfectly. But it was his presence that tethered me. His hand brushing against mine every so often, a quiet promise that neither of us would say aloud. By the time I left, my lipstick was smudged, my hair a little wild, and my heart pounding with the kind of exhilaration I hadn't felt in years. Whatever this was, whatever I had found in that house, I wasn't ready to give it up. Not yet. When I woke the next morning, The sunlight creeping through my blinds felt intrusive, too bright for the shadowy memories of the night before. My dress was crumpled on the floor, and the faint scent of cologne lingered on my skin, a reminder of the stranger with a magnetic smile. The day passed in a haze. I replayed every glance, every touch, every word exchanged in the glow of that house. I couldn't stop thinking about how alive I'd felt, like I had stripped off years of routine and obligation and stepped into someone else's skin. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a spectator in my own life. I was the one holding the pen. By evening, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Hope you landed softly after last night. We didn't get to finish our conversation. Are you free tonight?" It was him, the man from the party. I stared at the message for a moment, my heart racing. His confidence in sending it was bold, as if he already knew I'd say yes. And I did. The second party wasn't in a house. It was in a sleek penthouse downtown, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering cityscape, and the atmosphere was sharper this time. Less cozy, more electric. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt his presence before I saw him. He appeared at my side, his hand grazing the small of my back. "You came," he said, his voice smooth, layered with something I couldn't quite name. "I don't know why," I admitted. "I just wanted to feel alive again," he finished for me, a knowing look in his eyes. The night unfolded differently this time. The penthouse was alive with movement, laughter, and whispered conversations that hinted at things unspoken. The crowd was larger, their faces less familiar. Unlike the warm intimacy of the first house, this was a maze of possibilities, every corner holding a secret. "Let me show you something," he said, and before I could answer, he took my hand, guiding me toward a hidden staircase that led to the rooftop. Up there, the air was cooler, the sounds of the city buzzing faintly below us. He leaned against the railing, his posture relaxed, but his eyes burned with intensity. "I come up here when it all feels like too much," he said, gesturing to the lights below. "It's easy to forget who you are when you're down there. Do you feel that way often?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Only when I forget why I came here in the first place." He turned to face me fully. "Why did you come back tonight?" I hesitated, the truth too raw to voice. "Because last night felt different, like I was someone else, or maybe just a better version of myself." He smiled, but there was a sadness in it. "You don't need a party to find her. She's always been there. You just need to let her out." The words lingered between us, heavy with meaning. Before I could reply, he reached for my hand, his touch steady. "Let's go back inside. You're missing the best part." When we descended the stairs, the party had shifted. The music was slower, and the groups that had mingled earlier were smaller now, more intimate. A woman with a flowing emerald dress caught my eye as she leaned in close to a man whispering something in her ear, her laughter low and throaty. It wasn't scandalous or wild. It was magnetic. There was no shame in the way people moved or touched. Every glance and gesture carried intent, but it was free of expectation. For the first time I realized why I had come. It wasn't about rebellion or revenge. It was about peeling back the layers of who I thought I was and finding the pieces I didn't know I'd hidden away. As the night stretched on, I found myself opening up in ways that surprised me, talking to strangers, sharing parts of myself I usually kept locked away. And through it all, he was there, always nearby, his presence a steady anchor. By the time I left, I wasn't just thinking about the man who had drawn me in. I was thinking about who I had become in his orbit. Someone freer, bolder, untethered from the weight of my everyday life. It was easier this time. The hesitation that had hung over me at the first party was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence I didn't know I possessed. The text came early in the day, simple and direct. "Tonight. You know where." I didn't question it. I didn't need to. I spent the afternoon preparing, each choice intentional. A midnight blue dress, sleek and simple, paired with heels sharp enough to feel dangerous. The reflection in my mirror wasn't a stranger anymore. It was me, bolder, more daring, a version of myself I wasn't ready to let go of. The venue was different again, this time a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. A tall iron gate greeted me, opening slowly as I approached, as though the night itself had been waiting. The house loomed ahead, all glass and sharp angles, its modernity a stark contrast to the lush, overgrown gardens that surrounded it. Inside, the atmosphere was intoxicating. The air was warm, filled with the scent of wine and something floral I couldn't place. Conversations hummed, low and intimate, weaving together like a symphony. The crowd was larger, more polished, their movements deliberate and full of purpose. I spotted him almost immediately. He was standing near the fireplace, a glass of red wine in hand. His tie loosened just enough to hint at ease without losing control. When his eyes met mine, he smiled, slow, deliberate, as if the room had disappeared and it was just us. "You made it," he said when I reached him. His voice low and familiar. "Was there ever a doubt?" I replied, surprising myself with the flirtation in my tone. He chuckled, a soft sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Not for a second." The night unfolded like a dance, each moment leading seamlessly into the next. The conversations were easy, the laughter genuine. It was unlike anything I'd experienced before, intimate without being intrusive, playful without losing its edge. But as the hours passed, the energy shifted. People began to pair off, their movements slower, their touches more deliberate. The air grew heavier, charged with an unspoken understanding. I found myself in a dimly lit room off the main hallway, a cozy den with velvet couches and a roaring fire. The small group inside was gathered in pairs, their laughter quieter now, their voices dropping to murmurs. He was next to me, his presence steady and grounding, his hand brushing mine in a way that felt both casual and deliberate. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his gaze steady on mine. "Yes," I said, and to my surprise I meant it. His smile deepened and he leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "This is the moment, you know. The one where you decide who you want to be tonight." I didn't answer right away, the weight of his words settling over me. It wasn't just about the party. It was about me, about shedding the layers of expectation and fear I'd carried for too long. "I think I already know," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded, his expression calm but intense, as though he'd been waiting for this answer all along. The rest of the night was a blur of sensations and fleeting moments. The heat of his hand on mine, the soft laughter of the group around us, the way the firelight flickered against the walls. I wasn't watching from the sidelines anymore. I was part of it, fully present in a way I hadn't been before. By the time the party wound down, the house was quieter, its energy softened but still lingering. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The woman I had been when I walked in felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone I wasn't quite ready to define. He walked me to my car, his hand lingering on mine as he said goodbye. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice warm. "You let yourself live." "I did," I admitted, a smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me hide." He didn't reply, but his smile said enough. As I drove away, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold, I knew I'd never be the same. The text came with an address and 3 words. "This is it." It was from him. No explanation, no invitation. Just a directive that felt both commanding and intimate. I stared at the message for a long time, the weight of its meaning settling over me. It wasn't just another party. It was the culmination of every risk, every whispered secret, every hesitant step I'd taken into this hidden world. I replied with a single word: yes. The address led me to a mansion perched high on a cliff, the ocean crashing against the rocks below. The driveway was lined with cars more expensive than my apartment, their polished exteriors reflecting the soft glow of lanterns that lit the path. As I stepped inside, the house unfolded like a labyrinth, each room revealing something more intricate, more intimate than the last. The air was thicker here, heavier with expectation. The people, some familiar, others new, moved with a sense of purpose. Their laughter was softer, their touches more confident, as though everyone had agreed to leave their masks at the door. He found me almost immediately. His hand grazed the small of my back, guiding me toward a staircase that spiraled up into the shadows. "This way," he said, his voice low and steady. I followed him without question. The room at the top of the stairs was unlike anything I'd seen before. The walls were lined with mirrors, their reflections multiplying the dim light from a chandelier that cast soft, golden shadows. A circular seating area dominated the space, velvet cushions arranged in an unbroken loop that seemed to invite confession, vulnerability, and something deeper. "This is where it all begins," he said, stepping aside to let me take it in. "Begins?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his expression calm but serious. "You've been walking toward this moment since the first night. The question is, are you ready to take the next step?" I felt the weight of his words, the unspoken meaning behind them. It wasn't just about the party. It was about shedding the last of my fear, letting go of the person I thought I had to be and stepping fully into the one I'd discovered here. "I am," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. He smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips that felt like both a reward and a challenge. The night unfolded like a dream, each moment more surreal and electrifying than the last. The room buzzed with an energy that was impossible to describe, an unspoken connection between everyone present. We weren't strangers anymore. We were pieces of a larger whole, moving together in perfect harmony. For the first time I felt free. Not just free to exist but free to feel, to take up space, to be seen and heard without apology. It was intoxicating, a liberation I hadn't known I needed. As the night wore on, the mirrors around the room caught fragments of us all. Laughter, glances, the brush of hands and the soft murmur of voices. The reflections didn't lie. They showed us as we were in that moment, raw, unfiltered, and unafraid. By the time I left, the sky was starting to lighten, the faintest hint of dawn creeping over the horizon. He walked me to my car, his hand lingering on mine as he spoke. "Whatever happens next, remember this. You don't need permission to live your life the way you want. You never did." I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. His presence had been a guide, a catalyst for something I hadn't been brave enough to face on my own. As I drove away, the memories of the night replayed in my mind, vivid and alive. I wasn't the same woman who had walked through that door. And I wasn't sure who I'd be when I returned to the world I'd left behind. But one thing was certain. I'd never forget the night I found myself.